Good evening, everyone. That was pretty good, actually. That was better than most of my day. I'm Alan Leshner. I'm the Chief Executive at AAAS, and it's a tremendous pleasure for me to welcome all of you to this birthday party, 40th birthday, for the AAAS Science and Technology Fellowship Program. Good. And as a special gift, I will not sing Happy Birthday. We have much to celebrate tonight, and we will. Tremendous growth, participation, impact, great partnerships, big achievements. There are now more than 2,600 fellows who've made a tremendous contribution here in DC and who continue to provide great leadership at the intersection of science and policy, both here in the nation's capital and around the world. Across government, academia, the private and nonprofit sectors, they hold positions of great influence. They make a big difference in a world where impact ought to be the main reinforcer in life. The policy fellows certainly have demonstrated their ability to do that. We're very proud of everybody's accomplishments and their ongoing contributions. We're particularly grateful tonight to the sponsoring societies, funders, and host offices without whom the Science and Technology Fellowships wouldn't exist. Over the decades, more than 70 science and engineering societies and organizations have sponsored fellows. We particularly appreciate the 3 societies that took the initial step with us and joined to launch the program: the American Physical Society, the American Society for Mechanical Engineers, and the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. Over these 40 years, 85 congressional offices and committees, as well as the Office of Technology Assessment, may it rest in peace, the Congressional Research Service, and the Government Accountability Office have provided, it didn't say that in my dummy notes, have provided learning opportunities to nearly 1,100 congressional science and engineering fellows. More than 20 executive branch agencies and entities have hosted, funded, and trained about 1,600 fellows while gaining from their knowledge, input, and analytical skills. I, in particular, would like to recognize our partners of 33 years with whom we launched the Executive Branch Fellowships. The State Department had the first year-long assignments in the Executive Branch and has hosted more than 250 fellows since then. The Environmental Protection Agency began with a summer program in 1980 and moved to a year-long program in 1997. EPA has hosted 288 fellows. U.S. Agency for International Development has the distinction of hosting the largest number of fellows. That was Alex. You were clapping, right? Okay, just checking. A grand total of 401 since 1982. We now have partnerships with more than a dozen federal agencies across Washington, and on behalf of AAAS and our partner science and engineering societies, thanks to all the staff of the legislative and executive branch offices and agencies who've been so generous with their time, energy, and input in hosting and mentoring fellows. There's another set of individuals I'd like to recognize, the fellowship staff and advisors. I want to highlight the fellowship program directors whose leadership over the decades has been instrumental to its success. I'm really delighted that all of the still living directors since 1973 are with us tonight. Richard Scribner, I never knew his first name was Richard. I thought it was Dick. Richard Scribner, who served twice, was among the chief architects of both the Congressional Executive Branch Fellowships. Charles Mosier and William Wells, infused new ideas and energy in their terms. Steve Nelson, who held the longest term as director. Claudia Sturgis Claudia Sturgis Scott expanded upon the solid foundation and initiated valuable enhancements as the program grew. And I also, of course, want to acknowledge Al Tyke, who I saw earlier in the room. There he is, who for 30 years directed the division under which the fellowship programs flourished. In the years since the program was launched, the need and call for fellows has grown as the issues that policymakers and regulators grapple with have become increasingly diverse, globalized, and entwined. Since 2004, Cynthia Robinson has been at the helm of the fellowships program. And the annual class size has now nearly doubled. Additional agencies are now partners. The number of applications has increased 150%, and new program areas have been established. This is really something about which AAAS and our partner societies are tremendously proud. It's the program we all hear about whenever we talk to people from foreign countries. They come, they want to know how we made it happen. You did it. Applaud yourselves. And why it's such a great success. People want to emulate it around the world, and even an unnamed state out on the West Coast, its population is slightly larger than many countries, has been emulating the program itself. It's with great pleasure that I give you Cynthia Robinson, who has been doing a superb job leading the program.
On behalf of the AAAS Fellowship staff, I want to echo Alan's welcome. This is a very, very exciting occasion for all of us. You know, it's always a nice opportunity to reflect on history, to acknowledge contributions, to celebrate our successes, of course, as well, and also to re-energize as we're getting ready to enter into a new decade. E.B. White is credited with saying, "I arise each morning with a desire to save the world and a desire to savor it." This makes it hard to plan the day. The fellows that I've had the good fortune to encounter over my 9 years at AAAS have embodied this drive, curiosity, and enthusiasm. And they often tell me that trying to keep to a schedule in the policy world is one of their greatest challenges. So tonight, we thought there's probably no more fitting way to look back on our history than through a scientific lens. We're going to highlight aspects of our 40 years from the perspectives of 8 fellowship alumni and also a representative from one of our host agencies. They're going to be able to share with us their stories and experiences which really bring this program alive. I'm going to introduce them by title only because we really want to spend time on their remarks. Brief bios, you should all have had these at your chairs. We'll give you a lot more information about their illustrious accomplishments. But they're going to help us to look at our history and honor it from lessons learned and also a focus on the future. You know, I think of the S&T Policy Fellowships as one of those great examples of build it and they will come. A convergence of individuals, energy and ideas, organizations, and national and world events aligned to prompt action. The late 1960s and 70s were a time of great social, political, and technological change. In 1973, the US pulled out of Vietnam. The Watergate hearings began. Inflation was high. It was the advent of genetic engineering. The Alaska Oil Pipeline Bill was passed. The Ethernet was patented, and the S&T Policy Fellowships were launched. You know, the original hypothesis was really quite simple. Connect scientists, engineers, and policymakers. Bring them together. But most importantly, create pathways for scientists and engineers to provide information and analysis directly to government processes. Better policy will be the result. So, with a partnership of those 4 scientific and engineering societies and the generous support of William Golden, AAAS's long-serving treasurer, the experiment known as the Congressional Science and Engineering Fellowships began. 7 fellows accepted that challenge and entered into service to members of Congress and congressional committees. The experiment expanded annually. The executive branch fellowships were launched 7 years later. Since the beginning, our aim has been, of course, two-way benefit. Host offices gain the experience and expertise to inform policy from talented individuals with energy, fresh perspectives, and new networks. Fellows gain experience in how policy is not only deliberated, but developed, funded, regulated, and evaluated. And they also are able to take away an understanding of how science is applied to make a difference not only at the federal level, but local, national, and international levels. It's my pleasure to welcome to the podium now one of those very talented and energetic individuals from the first class that answered that initial call to civic engagement. Michael Telson, Vice President for Energy and Advanced Concepts at the General Atomics Corporation. He was one of the first 3 AAAS-sponsored fellows in that class that started our grand experiment in 1973.
Thanks, Cynthia. It's a real pleasure to be here with you tonight. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? I can't believe it. In September, it'll be 40 years. And Scribner took us around like we were lost sheep. You remember? We have some stories for those of you who are interested. Herman Talmadge, remember that one? That was an incredible story. We were there, sort of, Herman Talmadge was this real Southern guy from Georgia. He was in the Watergate Committee, very bright man, but very, very Georgia. Very Georgia. And as we were talking to him, I remember him turning his head somewhere, and then something happened, and I heard something hit Cuspidor. You know, he actually, from 3 feet away, he hit the damn thing. And I remember thinking I wasn't in Cambridge anymore. Remember that? It's amazing. At any rate, there are many things I could talk about, but I was given the assignment, a call to civic engagement. So I thought I'd say a couple things about that. Cynthia put the strands out there that 73 was a very interesting year, to say the least. All hell was breaking loose. Nixon was on the ropes. I had the benefit of having I was a student at MIT, and I did a project with Carol Wilson, who was Vannevar Bush's top aide. And he sort of got me into a project with Scoop Jackson at the Energy Committee. And I met some of the brightest people I'd ever met, including at MIT. Bill Van Ness, Dan Dreyfus. These are really top quality people. And I said, and my father had always told me, try it. You'll learn something, you know? And so I said, when this fellowship call came, I said, I was very interested for a couple of reasons. First, all hell was breaking loose. Secondly, I grew up in Cuba, for those of you who don't know. And in Cuba, I learned one thing: politics can really hurt you. So you better keep your eye on politics. So that was not even in the back of my mind. I really wanted to know how the hell the system worked. And I was particularly interested because my dad was a businessman, and I was looking into technical management as a career. I was doing electrical engineering, but I was looking at, doing some R&D management and learning how money flowed in the federal government. And when I came down here and I spent my year with the Senate Energy Committee, I'll tell you a very quick story. Dan Dreyfus, when all hell was breaking loose on energy after the Arab oil embargo, Dixie Lee Ray, I guess it was at the time, came out with an idea of spending another $5 billion over 10 years, or was it 10 billion over 5 years? I think it was 10 billion over 5 years. So Dan turned to me and said, Mike, why don't you call Hugh Loweth at OMB and see what he thinks, how we could spend the money? Because Dan had no idea. So I called Hugh, and Hugh is recently departed, a wonderful man who had a lot to do with building the technical capability into OMB, which then transmitted into other places as well. Hugh was a very crusty guy who was also an organist in this church, by the way. So he had a very wonderful side to him, but he was crusty as hell. And I remember he didn't know me from Adam. I said, "Oh, Mr. Loweth, this is Mike Telson. I'm an intern with Dan Dreyfus." And he wanted me to talk to you about how we could spend another $10 billion over 5 years in energy R&D. And I'll never forget his answer. He said, "Well, I guess we could throw another couple $100 million into solar and not piss it away." This is my first exposure to how budget making was done in the federal government. So, again, call for civic engagement. I grew up in Cuba, wanted to know how the hell this worked. I wanted to know how the money flowed. So, since then, I spent 20 years in the Budget Committee learning this in great depth. Then I went to DOE, became CFO there, and I'll never forget being interviewed by Bill Richardson. I was CFO under Federico Peña, and Bill Richardson asked me to stay, but before he asked me to stay, he interviewed all of us to make sure we knew that we were working for him. That was never a question in my mind. I know who I work for, the secretary. And he said, "What's a nice boy like you with a PhD in electrical engineering doing being a CFO?" So I explained to him that money had a lot to do with making the world go round, and that was my interest. And he gladly understood and accepted that because he was very much into the instruments of power, and that was an argument that scored very heavily with him. Okay, finally, just want to tell you, because time is running short, I still enjoy selling the need for public investment in science. Cynthia was talking about the past. Now we're talking, as Bill Clinton said, it's always about the future. And I think we can all agree that as money shrinks, well, the opportunities for science are growing even bigger than they were when we were here. The power of instruments, the power of technology has amplified what we can do, and yet the money is shrinking. I think that's a cause that's worthy for us to be working in. I think we, as former fellows, should do more to work together to find the synergy that we can find to help address this problem, particularly because not only is the federal government money shrinking, but private money in companies is also very tight. The stringency of making profits is really tightening, and Bell Labs are gone away, and those kinds of things are gone away. So that's my idea for the future. In any event, thank you very much, and let's make sure that 10 years from now, we're still as strong as we are today. Thanks.
Policy change often happens in fits and starts, and unfortunately, I think lately we would all agree it's been more on the fit side. But perseverance pays off, and I think that's one of the things this program points out. Timing, though, is key. And it's critically important to be prepared when opportunities arise. And from my perspective, that is one of the true values and the reasons that this program and this model of immersion is so successful. Fellows are in the trenches, they're at the tables when the openings appear, and they're positioned and primed to take action in real time. With Mike, as with so many others, often fellows catch Potomac fever and remain engaged in the policy realm, both inside and outside of government. And our next speaker is one of those individuals. He's worked at the Hill, OMB, EPA, OSTP, and many other places. Please join me in welcoming Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Covanta Energy, Paul Gilman.
Thank you. My takeaway from my time as a fellow, responsibility, a huge responsibility. We were educators first. 2 days after the 3 Mile Island accident, taking an elevator away from Senator Gary Hart's office where we had a briefing by the commissioners of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on the status of the reactor there. Senator Alan Simpson turned to me and said, "Paul, I don't get it. This was a 1 in a million chance. It was supposed to happen in a million years. How do you explain probability in the elevator to a man who was elected to be a leader and had a bit of an ego, has a bit of an ego himself?" We were educators first, and then we'd be asked to be advocates. And walking that path when trained as a scientist or an engineer can be difficult. We have a responsibility to explain the truth as we see it, but we're thrust into the advocacy role. I had a number of other stories I could talk about. I'm going to focus on the story of particulate matter. I was telling Bob Cook Dehgan will save the human genome and the influence of fellows on the formation of the Human Genome Project for the 50th. Particulate matter. In 1997, Carol Browner, administrator of the EPA, was saying we needed significant new protections in the Clean Air Act for fine particulate matter. She rested that assertion on some evidence that had been gathered by epidemiologists. Now, don't get me wrong, epidemiologists are wonderful people. Some of my best friends are epidemiologists. But it wasn't selling on the Hill. In fact, there was quite a bit of turmoil, and the whole question of where that regulation was going to go, was it going to be allowed to take its form, was up in the air. A remarkable convergence of Hill staffers, wonderful people on the Appropriations Committee like Carrie Apostolou and Frank Cushing, who had been influenced by former fellows and scientists, said, well, let's let the scientists figure this one out. And they put together a multi-year research program, and they said that program needed to be laid out by scientists and engineers. And they gave that responsibility to the National Research Council, where again, scientists, engineers, former fellows and the like participated in that. I participated in those early years as well, but I especially came to be involved in them in 2003 timeframe when I had a role at the US EPA as an appointee. And we'd taken the weak evidence of what those epidemiologists said. How could someone be affected by particulate matter in the air and have a sudden cardiac event that would lead to death within 3 days period? That was the kind of thing that said to the policymakers on Capitol Hill, this has to be nonsense. How could that be? Well, by 2003, we understood the molecular basis for that cardiac event and the role that particulate matter played in it. And it had its inception with staffers on Capitol Hill who'd come to understand the role of science. And so I have a view today that when I went to work in the fellowship program, we'd say science is part of the consideration for policy. We sometimes said that somewhat apologetically. We weren't so sure people on the other side of the conversation were believing. But I think today, fellows and other scientists and engineers participating in the process have catalyzed that to the point where today the scientific and technical elements are the context for the debate. I want to thank AAAS for the opportunity to be a fellow. It changed my life, and I hope that you and I have changed lives of others with that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. You know, of course, the fellowships began in Congress, so it seems quite fitting that this evening one of our presenters be a member of Congress, apropos that he's also an alum, and an alum who was sponsored by one of our initial partners. Rush Holt, United States Representative of New Jersey's 12th District, was a fellow, 1982-83. He's the only alum to hold national elected office, so far, that is. We all know, of course, how necessary the ingredients to remain in office include connecting with constituents and campaign money. It's a Friday evening during recess, so Rush is back in his district focusing on both of those things. But he wanted to send his greetings and his reflections in his absence. So here on video, the Honorable Rush Holt.
Hello, I'm Rush Holt. So many fellows have told me over the years how important the American Association for the Advancement of Science fellowships have been to them. They say that they are life-changing or at least career-changing. And I'm sure the fellowships are that good. It certainly was for me. But I'm here to tell you how important the fellowship program is to the good governance of America. This is important to our country. We should thank the originators for coming up with such a good idea, and AAAS for running the program so well over these decades and maintaining high standards. And of course, we should thank the fellows themselves, or maybe I should say the fellows ourselves. The originators created a fellowship that was intended to bring expertise to government and to carry political savvy back to the professions. Now, I'm speaking primarily about the Congressional Fellowship because of my own experience and because I've enjoyed the benefit of fellows in my office now as a member of Congress over the years. Some fellows have been responsible for writing or perfecting specific beneficial legislation. And some, I'm pleased to say, have been responsible for diverting or stopping misguided legislation. In any case, it has been a real benefit to Congress. But I think the greatest benefit comes from the elevated discussion that results from having fellows on the Hill embedded in the offices throughout Congress. They bring a fidelity to facts, a respect for research, and always lead the discussion back to where the evidence rests. The benefit of the fellows is not so much in policy areas of science funding or areas that are obviously scientific, but in those countless areas where the science is embedded or even hidden, maybe not obvious, or where research can show that some approaches are better than others. Here, the fellows have really shown and brought something that would not be present otherwise. It's gratifying to see fellows grow in political sophistication during their term. Some of them arrive, ready to teach Congress a thing or two, apparently believing that there is no final answer to the question, how dumb can Congress be? And you watch them and they begin to learn and grow in respect for the genius of the system, this system for drawing wisdom from the people for their self-government. Former fellows, in many cases, are even more beneficial to our country, whether they remain on the Hill or in policy areas in DC or go back to industry or academia. From every aspect, the program has been a real success, and I applaud it and you.
So our first three presenters have been from the first decade of the fellowships. I'd also like to highlight the alumni representatives of the first decade in our 40 at 40 campaign. They equally exemplify the continuing engagement at the intersection of science and policy. I'm very pleased that we have with us this evening three of the individuals who are featured: Bill Colglazer, Arlene Macklin, and Lindsay Chase Lansdale. If you haven't gone online yet to Fellows Central to read their stories, you should do so. They're very inspiring. And I hope you take advantage of the opportunity to speak with the three who are here tonight to hear more about their stories at the reception afterward. And I just want to give you a little heads up that the second decade of 40 at 40 are going to be announced in June, so stay tuned for the next issue of Fellowship Focus. You know, one of the greatest features of the S&T Policy Fellowships is the chance to apply scientific and technological training both within one's area of expertise and far beyond. And over the years, fellows have made contributions to just about every topical area you can imagine. And some that for sure the fellows never imagined. For example, June Bando certainly had no idea that her background in oceanography would lead to strategizing response to piracy on the Indian Ocean. In other cases, skills are applied in situations that are unfortunate and unanticipated, such as responding to natural and human disasters. And sometimes the call to service can come in unusual forms. You never know when a Supreme Court justice will need to be guided through a federal agency, or when there might perhaps be a chance to enlighten a movie star on climate science, for example. Our next speaker has been at the forefront of problem solving to combat disease and address human health challenges. Please join me in welcoming President of the Foundation of NIH, Maria Freire.
Good evening, everybody. It's just amazing. I can't believe I'm part of the 40s generation here. This is just fantastic. But I want to thank you, Cynthia, and I want to thank you, Alan, and the people at AAAS for giving me this opportunity and in my 5 minutes tell you a little bit of my story. But I would be remiss if I didn't highlight the importance of people like Bill Wells, and Dick and Steve and Al, and the wonderful Claudia. It's good to see you all here. Thank you very much. Very much like Cynthia, they have left an inspired mark in this fellowship program. And as we heard earlier, they have changed our lives. They certainly changed my life, so thank you. My Congressional Science Fellowship was sponsored by the Biophysical Society and the American Society for Photobiology. In fact, I think I gave the AAAS people a little bit of a heartburn because I was among the first to have 2 years worth of fellowship. It had never been done. Poor Dick Scribner couldn't figure it out. I think they were just too lazy to go look for another fellow, to tell you the truth. But through their generosity and through their trust, I had the unique opportunity and, in fact, the great fortune to spend these 2 years. The first year I spent in the office of Norm Mineta in the House of Representatives. And to this day, I think he's a fabulous politician. No matter where I bump into Norm, he says he remembers me. I'm not so sure, but I'm holding on to that hope. And the second was at the office of J. Rockefeller, and it was fabulous because it was his very first year, it was his rookie year in Congress. So I had come from the House with some knowledge, and there was this rookie senator, and I actually had some things that I had learned along the way. It was, in fact, an extraordinary opportunity. It was a spectacular classroom, and as people have said before, it was filled with brilliant people. Now, I learned some very basic things, and others that were actually quite profound. Who knew, for example, note this, fellows, that the art of writing a substantive one-page memo is an incredibly important life skill. If you can't say it in 1 page, you haven't done your homework. That's what they used to tell us. Who knew that I would come back to the Hill many years later and be sitting in front of Congress and testifying before Congress, and that I would be briefing staffers, and that I would in fact be meeting members of Congress to advocate or to discuss a particular issue, including Rush Holt. I didn't know he was a fellow. I should have done more homework on him. We'd have gotten the secret handshake. Did anybody learn this? Everybody learns the secret handshake? But the thing that was most amazing when I would go back to Congress is that without any intent or any purpose, but simply because I was there, I had learned to navigate Congress and that world with great comfort and with great respect. That was amazing. I actually was at the other side, and I knew how to do it. Now, it was at my time in Congress that I worked, along with many, many people. I mean, when people say I worked on this, on that, you know it was a thumbprint, really, that they had on it. But nevertheless, I worked on a piece of legislation that was going to enable the transfer of technology from the federal sector to the non-federal organizations. It was called the Federal Technology Transfer Act. Along with its sister, the Bayh-Dole Act, they have changed the US and the global landscape forever because they have mandated and in fact allowed the transfer of technology for the benefit of society. Now, that piqued my interest. So when I left the Hill, I had no experience of patents. I knew nothing about licensing, and I for sure had never transferred anything in my whole entire life. But I recognized that there was an opportunity to unlock the potential of biotechnology for the benefit of patients. Now, the good news, certainly my only saving grace, is that the field was so new that there were very few people who knew how to do it. So that was great. And that's how my voyage began. It was an adventure that would take me from the University of Maryland in Baltimore, which gave me my first break, to the Office of Technology Transfer at NIH, where I met Alan, to being one of 10 commissioners selected by the World Health Organization to write a seminal report on the balance between intellectual property and health. By then, the good news is I had learned something about bringing technology from the laboratory to the patient, and we got really good at it, and we are really good at it. But see, here's the thing. We could license potential compounds for cancer, and we could certainly license diagnostics for many diseases, but no matter how hard we tried, it was nearly impossible to find takers for diseases for which there was little return for the investment. Diseases like malaria or dengue or Chagas or tuberculosis, because these were, and in fact, these still are, diseases of the poor. For these neglected diseases, we needed a different way to transfer technology. In 2001, I was given an amazing opportunity to head this tiny organization with a huge mission to develop new drugs against tuberculosis. 7 years later, with the help of a small, devoted, and single-minded staff and hundreds of partners worldwide, including people on the Hill and people at USAID and CDC and NIH, I left the Alliance having put together the largest portfolio of TB drugs ever assembled. The Alliance continues to thrive today, and I am confident that the world, in fact, will see a new treatment for tuberculosis. It wouldn't have happened, and it couldn't have happened, had I not seen this flyer in San Antonio at a Biophysical Society meeting stuck on a column saying, please apply for Congressional Science Fellowships. It has changed my life, and hopefully, as has been said earlier, I hope we have managed to help people a little bit through this journey. Thank you very much.
You know, the more thoroughly we involve and engage the full spectrum and diversity of our society, the stronger and more effective the fellowships become, because we're really targeting society's needs. Developing leaders to meet grand challenges entails a national STEM education focus, and how apropos that was the cover story of Science Magazine just last Friday. Training and experience and policy connections, what we do is obviously critical. Professional development and civic engagement across career stages. And also creating and supporting multiple career pathways for STEM leaders who represent the vibrant diversity of the nation. Fellows themselves have been very engaged in outreach and advocacy on these many fronts, and helping to encourage and mentor future generations of scientists and engineers, not only here in the United States, but far beyond. Our next alumni presenter is a national leader in STEM capacity building and also in diversity efforts. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie Adams, Department Head and Professor of the Department of Engineering Education at Virginia Tech.
Thank you, Cynthia, and good evening. I am truly humbled and honored to have been selected this evening as a speaker as we commemorate the 40th anniversary of AAAS. Unlike Groucho Marx, I'm happy to join a club that would have me as a member. A club that includes 2,600 talented scientists and engineers who have shared and continue to share our experiences and expertise with the political leadership of our beloved United States. I sought a fellowship in AAAS because I had the aspiration of becoming a president of an institution. And I thought that this would be an opportunity for me to understand a different side of how the academy works. So the relationship between government and education and policymakers, And so I applied for and was selected to spend my fellowship year at the National Science Foundation. Cynthia's asked me to talk briefly about developing leaders for grand challenges, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the grand challenges, but they were developed by the National Academy as a technical roadmap for our country and how we might continue to maintain our presence and dominance in innovation and problem solving. The National Academy, a few years back, recognized the 20 greatest achievements by engineers of the 20th century. Included on this list are electrification, automobiles, airplanes, water supply, computers, television, air conditioning, your iPhone, iPad, and et cetera, that's all in your pocket and vibrating as I speak. Many of these items, along with the ones that I chose not to mention, all required some form of legislation or governance by our policymakers to ensure they reach their full potential as scientists develop them and continue to advance them, while maintaining appropriate levels of safety for the citizens of our country and world who would be their benefactors. While this was a daunting task for these lawmakers and policy generators, they were very successful with what they had to do. But I think that the challenges that are before us now will provide a different level of understanding of STEM-related research and activities if we're to advance. When we look at the current makeup of the 113th Congress, there's a dearth of members in Congress with backgrounds in STEM. So I did my homework. There are 541 members, of which 2 have degrees in physics, 6 are engineers, and there's 1 microbiologist. These 9 individuals represent 1.6% of the members of Congress. As policymakers, how will Congress make effective policies and/or decisions about things they appreciate tremendously, benefit from daily, but have limited to no understanding of or knowledge about how it was conceived or produced? Take, for example, the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, a committee with jurisdiction over NASA, Department of Energy, EPA, NSF, FAA, and NIST. A committee with oversight of budgets totaling $39 billion, whose primary focus is on research and development. A committee with 39 members, of which 5 have degrees in STEM. How can they really fully understand the research that we're bringing them without people such as the fellows to come in and help them and shed some light? I thought about it, and I thought that the Fellows Program reminds me a lot of Patty Stanger, for those of you who are up on popular culture. She's the woman who comes on A&E and Bravo as the matchmaker, the millionaire matchmaker. So AAAS is the millionaire matchmaker who matches the best and brightest technical minds with agencies, congressional offices, and committees around Washington. Former NAE chair and Eastman Kodak CEO George Fisher said, "The Academy was created to help policymakers avoid major pitfalls and stay on the path to progress." So armed with our doctorates and an interest in the intersection of science and policy, we can play an invaluable role. But it's more than just the role that we play when we come. It's not a one-way street. We, the fellows, gain an in-depth exposure to the world of policy, which aids us in our understanding and our ability to shape our universities and other scholars. For me personally, my time at NSF as a fellow has aided me tremendously in my professional career. Much like Maria, I didn't know how to write a one-page memo either. As a professor, you could just pontificate on and on and on, and people just sit and listen. As long as you get there 15 minutes before, within 15 minutes of class starting, they have to stay. So in addition to gaining an in-depth understanding of NSF, the proposal, award, and management processes, which serves me on a daily basis, and a broader understanding of the workings of Washington, which sets me apart from my colleagues, I also learned how to succinctly state my position, summarize the need for and impact of new initiatives for those who will immediately benefit from them. Finally, I made connections with the next generation of STEM leaders and policymakers, which allows me to do my part in driving the grand challenges forward. Now it's my role to share my experiences with the next generation of STEM researchers so that they might consider a fellowship experience. I don't know how many of you get Science Magazine, but it's like everybody wants to have an article in Science Magazine. I didn't get an article in Science Magazine, I got a full-page ad in Science Magazine. So Cynthia, when I was a fellow, asked me, will you come with a bunch of other fellows and be a part of the annual report? Annual report, that sounds pretty simple. So we had this great photo shoot. They took hundreds and hundreds of pictures. We even got silly. There's a picture that I have that hopefully none of you have seen, with me with my computer up on my head. And they thought they should use that in the magazine. If I had known it was going in science, I might have let them, but just for a light moment. But anyway, I get asked a lot about my experience, and I laugh and say, I should have charged Cynthia a whole lot more money for that picture than I did, because I got 0 for it. But one of my fellow classmates said to me, he said, at the time we were fellows, there was a big picture of baby Einstein on the side of the AAAS building. And the joke was, Stephanie, you're going to replace baby Einstein on the side of the AAAS building. In all seriousness, I am really honored that AAAS made me a member of such a prestigious club. It has done a lot for my career. I laugh and tell people, when I left the University of Nebraska coming here for my fellowship year, I was assistant dean for research. I returned as the associate dean for undergraduate education. I'm not sure how many people get promoted and a raise while they're gone, but being a fellow sure seemed to help me out a whole lot. So I think for the next generation of academic leaders as well as policymakers, it's important that we continue the dialogue across the lines to make sure that we can continue to help our policymakers understand the importance of science and policy. Thank you.
You know, access is really one of the most critical issues to addressing grand challenges. This is true, of course, not only for education and opportunities for our own citizens, but also access to benefits of science for millions of disadvantaged and marginalized people around the world. The deep and lasting connections forged in the S&T Policy Fellowships Network really facilitates these kinds of collaborations across branches, agencies, sectors. And it really helps get information out through those connections about information and technology that is needed. Our next alumni presenter is building on alliances that she forged in her fellowship and applying them to address a critical global energy and health issue. We'll now hear from Ranyee Chiang, Senior Technical Advisor for the Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves at the UN Foundation.
Thank you, Cynthia. And good evening, fellow fellows, and also friends of fellows, and thanks to the amazing AAAS team that brings us together. So we've been talking about the impacts of the AAAS Fellowship on grand challenges, like energy and technology transfer, or working on the Hill by video. So I'll add another grand challenge to that list for tonight, boiling water. Okay, fine. Not the most complex scientific discipline, so I probably should give a little bit more context here. So building on my fellowship at the Department of Energy and actually working quite closely with another fellow alum, Sam Baldwin, who's here, and he probably knows where I'm headed with this boiling water thing. I now work with the Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves, and we're a public-private partnership of over 650 organizations working together to build markets for clean and efficient cookstoves and fuels. We're focused on the 40% of the world's population that cooks with solid fuels like wood and charcoal on traditional fires and stoves. The smoke from an open fire in a kitchen is like burning 400 cigarettes an hour. So this is a huge global health issue. 4 million deaths a year due to household air pollution. And in conflict areas, having to collect fuel puts women and children at risk of attack and rape. It's also an environmental issue because of deforestation from fuel use and emissions that impact climate. And because our goal is a sustainable market, this is also about economic empowerment. Cookstoves and fuels that lower emissions and reduce fuel use are a compelling opportunity because we're talking about being able to safely provide meals for your family, big impacts on women and children, and a possible win-win-win situation for health, environment, and livelihoods. But there are many challenges, and I'll focus on just one tonight, which is that many technologies are not yet good enough to achieve all the benefits. In other sectors, standards have been key to driving innovation, like with energy-efficient appliances in cars, food and product safety, and so on. So developing international standards is a core part of the Global Alliance's mission, and we're shepherding a consensus-driven and inclusive process to ensure maximum buy-in and effectiveness of the standards. And this gets us back to boiling water, which is a laboratory model for evaluating stove performance, which we need in place for standards. So boiling water, it seems straightforward, but we've had debates going on this for decades. And the reason it's difficult is that we want results that are reproducible and that reflect the complicated realities of how stoves are used. Do you test with the pot lid on or off? Are we talking about a gentle simmer or a full-on boil? In this room full of scientists and engineers, I'm sure many of you are already thinking of more issues. Does boiling water in the laboratory represent use in the home? And what about stoves for cooking tortillas or injera? We could go on, which people have done. And I haven't even gotten into burning wood, which by itself is really, really complicated. Two main reasons for the impasse. First, different priorities have led to uncoordinated approaches. And second, there's a worry that if we haven't worked out the science yet, we have to wait on making any policy decisions. So I'm sharing these challenges to illustrate the impacts of the AAAS Fellowship on this case, and also more broadly for the many challenges where we need to build agreement. As AAAS Fellows, we learn to balance different goals, and that's the approach we're taking here. We're balancing the current state of the science and the debate, even if it's not all resolved, with the policy goals. Of course, we do need to make further progress with the science, but the impacts of science are important enough that we can't wait to apply the results and tools that we already do have. And also, building relationships among the global community is also important. So I don't think we should underestimate the social aspects of this fellowship. The happy hours, the affinity groups, receptions like what we'll do tonight, and my favorite, blueberry picking. It's fun, but we also understand that the relationships facilitate our work within this community and also more broadly. And on this decade-old debate on boiling water, it's amazing what a single open mic night can do to facilitate scientific cooperation. We're not done resolving these issues with stove testing and standards, but we are on our way, and this will help us get higher quality stoves into people's homes. So I'm looking forward to continuing this celebration with all of you tonight. If anyone wants to talk more about boiling water, come find me. I'm also looking forward to the next 40 years, seeing how we balance science and policy as both spheres evolve, and also how we continue to integrate the social and professional goals within the Fellows Network. So congratulations, everyone, and here's to the next 40 years.
I find that one of the most exciting aspects of the fellowship program is the ability to respond and contribute to the changing needs of the nation immediately as they're happening. And again, to take those lessons from the federal realm and apply them elsewhere. Our next presenter has had the opportunity to do both. In fact, today she was chairing a Blue Ribbon Commission to address natural resources conservation and policy in Lake Tahoe, which meant she couldn't be here with us. But here, via video, is Maureen McCarthy, president of McCarthy & Smith Consulting.
Good evening, AAAS staff, honored guests, and fellow fellows. My name is Maureen McCarthy, and I'm honored to be part of the Science and Technology Fellows' 40th anniversary celebration. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person for this tribute to one of the nation's transformative programs in bridging science and policy making. I am chairing a Blue Ribbon expert panel today in lovely Lake Tahoe on ecosystem resiliency and environmental policy. As the first Defense Policy Fellow, I worked in the Office of the Secretary of Defense as a technical advisor for the first Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START. I came to Washington, D.C. in 1997 as a scientist with a keen interest and a brash naivete about national security policy making, and I left 12 years later with a deep appreciation for AAAS's role in bringing science, and more importantly, scientists, into all areas of government. The most valuable lesson I learned as a fellow is that it is not only what we know, but also how we communicate what we know that makes scientists able to transcend politics and inform policy. After 12 years advising national security policymakers and managing science, technology, and intelligence programs for the Departments of Defense, Energy, Homeland Security, the administration of President George W. Bush, and the intelligence community, I came to appreciate that science-based policy making is as critical at the local, state, and regional levels as it is for the federal government. Science, when in service to the nation, is invaluable in helping governments at all levels anticipate and respond to evolving and emerging threats. As a fellow and former fellow, I have had many opportunities to further the AAAS tradition of employing science in service to the nation and the world. After the breakup of the Soviet Union, the parties to the First START Treaty, in addition to the United States, were the 4 remaining nuclear weapons states: the Russian Federation, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus. Signing a treaty is easy. Ensuring compliance is a long, tedious, and technical process. Being a rocket scientist helped, but negotiating telemetry protocols through translation with 4 countries took AAAS training and a lot of mentoring from colleagues in the interagency. Transparency builds trust among the parties, but what we share and how we share it is key to protecting national security. Science diplomacy and national security met at the intersection of every negotiation. September 11th changed lives, nations, and the world. The Amerithrax attack that followed changed science and the role of science in national security. Science was at the forefront of our response to the events of 2001. New fields were born. Microbial bioforensics is one example, and policymakers clamored for more science to make us safe. Homeland security required new technology to meet the demands of civilian society as operations moved from battlefields and military targets to subways and airports. The lifeblood of the country, the movement of people, goods, and commerce, could not be impeded, but must be safe. Demands for a safer homeland were insatiable, and the age of Homeland Security science and technology was born. Katrina, and later Superstorm Sandy, taught us that not all threats to the homeland are man-made. Nature may be our greatest emerging threat. State and local jurisdictions are at the front line of natural disasters, and they need science that is accessible and usable to responders on the ground. Science-informed policy making is the cornerstone of natural resource protection. Climate change and wildland urbanization is driving the scientific community to develop new approaches to protecting natural resources while supporting economic development in urban and rural areas. In conclusion, AAAS is to be commended for 40 years of bringing science to the forefront of federal policy making, and just as important, for 40 years of teaching scientists that it is not just what we know, but how we communicate what we know that allows us to transcend politics and effectively inform policymaking. Enjoy your evening, and here's to 40 more years.
You know, we hear from fellows all the time that the experience can truly be transformative. But again, our program has always been about a two-way street. Fellows engaged and embedded in agencies can also have a transformative opportunity and impact on those entities. We're very pleased to have with us this evening Deputy Administrator Steinberg of USAID, the agency that has invested the most in the program as host to more than 400 S&T policy fellows over 32 years. Please join me in welcoming him and in thanking USAID for its tremendous support over the years.
Gosh, I'm tempted to just say, we're number one. We're number one. Actually, in reality, as a student who got a C- in my only science course throughout my entire academic career, I'm really tempted to begin by quoting James Stockdale in the 1992 vice presidential debate, "Who am I and why am I here?" But instead of that, I'm going to quote President Barack Obama. In his State of the Union address 2 months ago, President Obama said, and I quote, "The United States will join with our allies to eradicate extreme poverty in the next 2 decades by connecting more people to the global economy, by empowering women, by giving our young and brightest minds new opportunities to serve, by helping communities to feed, power, and educate themselves, by saving the world's children from preventable disease, and by realizing the promise of an AIDS-free generation." The first thing I did when I heard that was to cancel my vacation plans for the next 4 years. And the second thing I did was to sign us up for more AAAS fellows. Because indeed, one of the reasons for the presidential's call for eliminating extreme poverty was to re-energize a new generation of young people, to dedicate their lives to a purpose-driven life. Very similar to the impact of President Kennedy challenging young people in 1961 to a greater purpose through Peace Corps and through putting a man on the moon. And just like in 1961, if we're going to achieve these results, it's going to require the full application of science, technology, and innovation. We look historically, and the groundbreaking solutions to some of our world's toughest challenges, whether it's developing new strains of wheat and rice that ushered in the Green Revolution, or inventing a new vaccine delivery tool that made global smallpox eradication possible. These are the results of using the power of science and technology to accelerate development. Recognizing this, we have constantly looked at the fellowship program as an important development investment in our scientific capacity. And as was said, we have hosted 401 fellows in Washington and overseas throughout the last 4 decades. Science and technology is also one of the pillars of our reform effort at USAID. You know, I came back into the US government a few years ago after a time in the NGO sector, and I had to learn a new language. I spoke French and Portuguese and Malay, a little bit of English. I had to learn this language of science and technology. People were talking about data paloozas, crowdsourcing, tech challenges, hackathons. You know, I used to think hackers were bad people, and now we're working with one organization that calls itself Random Hacks of Kindness. I love puns, by the way. You know, and a key element in building our science agenda has been through the AAAS fellowship program. From a mere 2 fellows in 2007, I'm happy to report that last year we had more than 40 fellows, and that this year we have a total of 56, more than any other agency in the federal government. Let me guarantee you, our fellows are once again a part of the agency's DNA. Many of our most important programs, including our Partnership for Enhanced Engagement and Research, our Higher Education Solutions Network, our technical cooperation programs with Pakistan and the Middle East, are led or supported by AAAS fellows. In Indonesia, science and technology is a top development priority, largely thanks to the work of an overseas fellow. A fellow recently wrote the first ever progress report for Feed the Future, the President's food security initiative, with a focus on monitoring and evaluation. Another fellow, an entomologist, is working on the President's malaria initiative to help assess its impact and to respond to new challenges like insecticide resistance. Our work to build resistance and resilience in the Sahel region benefits from the skills of a water resources fellow who's helping strengthen land use management for farmers and pastoralists. We're also very fortunate that many S&T fellows have remained on our staff after their fellowships. I want to refer specifically to John Barroza, who is our chief of the Maternal and Child Health Division, John Wilson, who is the director of our Technical Support Office for the Middle East, Kit Batten, who is our Global Climate Change Coordinator, and a person you'll hear from next, Alex Dehgan, who is the Science and Technology Advisor to the Administrator and is changing the way we do business at USAID. So please go forth and spread the word that USAID is a great place for fellows to bring their skills and talents to the challenge of global leadership and development. But be forewarned, as Alex, John, and Kit have discovered, once you get infected with the development bug, there's usually no cure. Thank you for listening.
I would say that our final alumni speaker is a truly great example of the transformation that a fellowship can foster. You know, you never know where your field work and your passion for lemurs might lead. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Alex Dehgan.
That picture just scared the hell out of me. If you don't mind, let's just give it up for Deputy Administrator Steinberg and for Rod Shaw. These guys have been unbelievably supportive for science. So as you guys know, the developing world has unbelievable challenges in front of it. Interrelated problems that involve global environmental change, hunger, energy, emerging infectious diseases. But these aren't just developing country challenges. There are national security challenges. They affect Mali as well as Missouri in an interconnected world. And the nature of those challenges cross borders without visas. They don't respect ethnicity, religion, or political persuasion. They cannot be stopped by words, but only by deeds. They require a new legislator, a new type of diplomat, a new type of development official, a new leader, a new type of entrepreneur, one that is steeped in engineering, medicine, science, data and analysis, and who can operate against the demanding schedules of the policy process, one who advances science to serve society. In other words, this person has to be a translator between cultures, and AAAS fellows have that ability to do that. They have the ability to break down silos within institutions and the ability to connect across different institutions. And at USAID, we clearly believe in the fellowship. We talk proudly of the fact that we've hosted 401 fellows, but in 2007, we almost lost it. We were down to 2 fellows in the entering class, 5 overall. And as Don pointed out, this year we're going to have 56 fellows. This year we have 56 fellows. 11 of them are actually overseas in the missions, affecting change in development where it happens. And we hope to beat that number this next year. Our office just got 9 out of 10 of our #1 choices, and we're really excited about that. So why does this matter? It's because the agency, like the developing world, is in the middle of this demographic transition. 95% of our senior leadership could retire today with full benefits. 60% of the agency has less than 5 years of experience. The fellows come in as mid-career officers, and if we can just fill up the agency with these fellows, we can transform how we do development. And this is our moment, the first in 2 decades, to be able to transform the nature of development, to be able to transform the nature of the agency, and to transform government. As you know, everything is going to the master plan. Soon, veteran and active AAAS fellows will secure the job of controlling the executive branches of government, State Department, Defense, USAID, NSF, NIH, Congress not far behind. And if we only had a judicial branch fellowship, then we can activate FellowsNet. The plan will be complete. You come into government to change government. You, as Rush Holt said, you have all these ideas, you have all these inspirations, you know what you want to do, but what actually happens is that fellowships change who you are. I found that the fellowship changed myself in ways I didn't expect it. It changed completely the trajectory of my life. I was a tropical biologist. I spent 3 years, as some of you know, living in a tent in Madagascar, studying extinction, a day's walk from the nearest forest. And in that first year, I was in grad school and I wasn't actually doing very well. I found this flyer, this magic flyer that we talked about. Talked about the fellowship, and I actually copied it, put it up on my wall, and carried it with me for 6 years that it took to finish my graduate work. Within a week of coming back from Madagascar, 9/11 had happened. And everything was different. I'm Iranian American. I grew up in this country. It was a really tough, I think, experience to see what had happened, what the openness that was gone, what we saw in our society. And I had gotten, through the work that I'd done in Madagascar, a position at Yale and an opportunity to work in the canopy in Borneo, but it had lost its appeal. And so I was also worried about falling out of trees. But thanks to Norm Newrider, the first science advisor, and Andy Reynolds, the extraordinary deputy science advisor, within 3 months of leaving academia, I was on a C-130 making a spiral tactical landing into Iraq, a place without a lot of tropical forests, I found out. I did actually try to miss net for bats over Saddam's pool. But I was given $2 million in an assignment to redirect weapons scientists. And I ran the first program that actually said debathification is a really stupid idea. And what we tried to do is actually work to rebuild science, but not contain it. To actually rebuild a society that had been ravaged by war. And we did it by connecting through the trust that science brings, that allows us to connect across society and religion, that allows us to connect individuals and to rebuild a place that once was known for its science. When I came back, it was really hard to come back to Iraq. First, loud noises were not my friend. But the other thing is, I really missed that opportunity. And I gave a talk at AAAS and came up with this idea. I gave a talk about rebuilding a natural history library in Iraq. And one of the fellows at the time who came to a talk, Professor Susan Cumberledge, came up with the idea of why not trying to create a digital science library for the Iraqis. And a group of some extraordinary fellows, DJ Patel, who later became the chief scientist at LinkedIn, Rajiv Kush, who created the Quiet Institute, a leading water think tank, Ben Perman, Kwabena Yadam, and Barry Rippon, who wasn't a fellow but was an honorary fellow within our group, worked together to make this thing a reality. Susan, we didn't know, actually at the time, was suffering from cancer, and she was driving us really hard, and we couldn't understand why she was so intent on making this happen. But we actually created a virtual science library for Iraq that everyone told us could not happen. And we did it by working across defense and state to make it happen. We raised $300,000, got $17 million worth of journals, and provided 30,000 scientists who actively use that with the help of another organization, CRDF Global, whose chief executive officer is here with us today, Kathy Campbell. A virtual science library for the Iraqis that led to millions of articles being downloaded. And the best part is the Iraqis now pay for this, own it, and love it. This is a powerful network. And the one lesson I've learned from Washington is that it's not actually policy, it's people. And AAAS fellows are extraordinary people. And through the power of science, we will end hunger, we'll reinvent energy, and we'll stop preventable childhood deaths. And this is what matters. It will be the people who will be doing it. It will be the fellows who will be doing it. And so with that, I say happy birthday, AAAS. Make sure you make Alan sing happy birthday at the end of this. Thank you very much.
So, the evidence is in. Fellows have contributed in substantive ways across a huge spectrum of issues. They take that experience and apply it again across a broad range of sectors, and they make a difference. I'd say that our hypothesis is validated. As Alan pointed out, though, without our sponsors and host offices, we could not operate the fellowships. And in particular, the fellows' mentors have been pivotal to success. Here you see just two examples of the many, many supervisors and mentors who supported and guided fellows over 40 years. And to all of them who are in the room and not here, we are tremendously grateful. Of course, without stellar fellows year after year and their accomplishments, the sponsoring societies and host offices would not be continuing to invest in the program. And I want to acknowledge the important role that the application reviewers and the selection committee members have in helping to make sure that we ensure that quality. They have a huge and daunting task to make sure that they assess candidates and uphold the high bar that is the hallmark of this program. The advisory committee also plays an absolutely critical role in maintaining the high standards of our operation. And then there are the many trainers and presenters who offer their wisdom and guidance at orientation and other professional development events. They are critical to supporting fellows to perform their best. And again, here are just two examples among many, but I would imagine that pretty much every fellow in this room will recognize these individuals not only as longtime contributors, but absolutely as fountains of wisdom. And again, we thank all of those trainers and folks who've been involved. So what's the conclusion? It works. This collaborative experiment has been replicated now 40 times at the federal level, and each time with expansion and each time with greater output. I believe really the major element of the program's success is the diversity of the backgrounds and experiences that are brought to bear, a broad range of career stages and sectors, cultural perspectives, and of course, the many, many disciplines that are brought together. Because as our presenters here tonight have highlighted, the issues are complex. They need interdisciplinary and multi-stakeholder responses if we're going to make change with these tough challenges. And I would say the current class is exemplary, absolutely, of that great diversity. It's our largest class to date with 279 fellows. We have come a long way. And I really want to just have a big round of applause for that 40th class. This is a hugely exciting time in our evolution. We're known now as the Science and Technology Policy Fellowships, and I'm happy to tell you that's now a registered trademark. We're considered a national and international model of civic engagement for scientists and engineers. The experiment is being replicated beyond DC and beyond the federal policy realm. The California S&T Policy Fellowships were launched 3 years ago, and in this current class of fellows, we have our first alumnus from that program. I call that a positive feedback loop. A program modeled on ours was launched in Switzerland a decade ago, and 2 years ago, the Environmental Policy Science Fellowships were launched in Israel. A new ASEAN Science Policy Fellowship is being developed in hopes for a pilot phase that will soon launch. And we've had inquiries from many other countries and organizations as well. The program is vibrant and it's thriving. I think we're looking pretty good at 40. And there is absolutely no midlife crisis going on here. Despite sequestration, despite the tough budget situation going on right now, our numbers for September are either going to hold steady or increase once again. And I can say, I believe that is one of the most amazing affirmations of the value that the host agencies place on the contributions of fellows and the contributions that you all make. Thank you. Tonight, we are very pleased to unveil the initial phase of the S&T Policy Fellowship's 40-year timeline. You'll have a chance to look at it out during the reception. It's also up on Fellows Central Portal now, which I hope you all have looked at. And fellows, if you haven't signed in, go and do that. It provides a lot of information about our history juxtaposed with historic milestones at AAAS and national and world events. It's really quite fascinating to look through, and really a source of pride. You know, a lot, of course, has changed since 1973, but a look any day at the headlines, especially lately, just reminds us over and over again how much there continues to be done. But on the positive side, with your participation, the core of policy-savvy scientists and engineers is growing to respond to that need. Not only have we increased in size, we've expanded geographically and programmatically. It's already been mentioned that the overseas fellowships are now active in more than 10 countries. We've had inquiries from international offices at a number of the agencies to now place their fellows overseas as well. The new Global Health and Development Fellowship at the Gates Foundation was launched last year. And it's our intention to continue building on those solid roots, enhancing the fellowship program, and continuing, of course, to respond to society's needs. On that note, I am very pleased to announce that in the 2014-15 fellowship year, we will be launching a new program area on big data and analytics. And I'm also pleased to announce that we'll be launching our pilot judicial program. Thanks for that lead-in, Alex. So stay tuned, look for those emails and fellowship focus editions that we send you. Lots more details will be coming. So as we move into our 5th decade, we're counting on you, all of you, for your continued input, participation, and collaboration. You are essential to our success. So to all of the fellows, our colleagues across AAAS as well, the host offices, sponsoring societies, and other contributors and friends of the program, a very, very hearty thank you, and onward to 50.
So I guess I get the last word. It pays to be the boss. Alex, I'm really sorry I'm not singing. Actually, you're really happy I'm not singing. It'll work out well. I also do have, we'll sing at the end, don't worry. I also have to correct one thing, just for my friends in the intellectual property business. That so-called Einstein baby, that's trademarked by somebody else. That isn't the Einstein baby, that's the Allen baby. I think we've had a great evening, and I want to thank all of the speakers. They have done a wonderful job illustrating that the Science and Technology Policy Fellows serve as science advisors, as educators, as ambassadors for science, and much of what they're doing is ensuring that we do, in fact, have a voice for science in policy making in this country. And we in the scientific community, and in fact, we and our 42 partner societies do represent the scientific enterprise. We all the time talk about the need to have a voice for science and policy, and you all, the current and past fellows, are in fact providing that voice, whether the policymakers want to hear it or not sometimes, but nonetheless, we do, through this vehicle, have a powerful voice for science in the way the country approaches those very serious problems that all of you have been working on. I want to take one more minute and thank again the AAAS Fellowship staff members, both past and present. If they would just stand for a minute, you'll see there are a lot of them. Up. Thank you. And I do want to particularly thank Olga Francoise, Barry Williams, Christina Lawrence, and Bethany Spencer, who have put a tremendous amount of time putting all of this together. I'm very fond of welcoming the new incoming class of fellows by reminding them that they have a lifelong obligation to remain loyal and connected to AAAS, to serve as moles throughout the world for science and public policy, and I just want to remind you of that obligation. And I don't know, I sort of feel like we should sing, don't you? Let's sing. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear fellows. That's good. Happy birthday to you.